Everyone, thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in matters of Torah. This week's Torah portion is Chayei, which begins in the book of Genesis with chapter 23, verse 1. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute, together we can recite our blessing, giving thanks for this moment together. Baruch
atah
Adonai
Eloheinu melech
haolam
asher kiddushanu
mitzvotav
v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. We will read through the English translation of our weekly Torah portion. I'll share with you a little bit of focused study, and then we will open it up for our collective conversation. So we begin book of Genesis, chapter 23, verse 1. Sarah's lifetime, the span of Sarah's life, came to 127 years. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham proceeded to mourn for Sarah and to bewail her. Then Abraham rose from beside his dead and spoke to the Hittites, saying, I am a resident alien among you. Sell me a burial site among you, that I may remove my dead for burial. And the Hittites replied to Abraham, saying to him, Hear us, my lord, you are the elect of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places, and none of us will withhold his burial place from you for burying your dead. Thereupon Abraham bowed low to the people of the land, the Hittites, and he said to them, If it is your wish that I remove my dead for burial, you must agree to intercede for me with Ephron, son of Zohar. Let him sell me the cave of Machpelah that he owns, which is at the edge of his land. Let him sell it to me at the full price for a burial site in your midst. Richard, would you like to read a little at verse 10?
Yes, thank you. Ephron was present among the children of Heth, so Ephron, the Hittite, answered Abraham in the hearing of the children of Heth, all who sat at the council of his town, saying, No, my lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead. Then Abraham bowed low before the people of the land, and in the hearing of the people of the land, saying, If only you would hear me out. Let me pay for the price of the land. Accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there. And Ephron replied to Abraham, saying, My lord, do hear me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver, what is that between you and me? Abraham accepted Ephron's terms. Abraham paid out to Ephron the money that he had named in the hearing of the children of Heth, 400 shekels of silver at the going merchant's rate.
Thank you, Richard. Sherry, would you like to read a little bit there, starting at verse 17?
Thank you. So Ephron's land and Machpelah near Mamre, the field with its cave and all the trees anywhere within the confines of that field, passed to Abraham as his possession in the presence of the Hittites, all who entered the gate of his town. Then Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field at Machpelah, facing Mamre, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Thus the field with its cave passed from the Hittites to Abraham as a burial site.
Thank you. Steve, would you like to read a little, starting at the beginning of chapter 24?
Thank you. Abraham was now old, advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to the senior servant of his household, who had charge of all that he owned, Put your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but will go to the land of my birth and get a wife for my son Isaac. And the servant said to him, what if the woman does not consent to follow me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the land from which you came? Abraham answered him, on no account must you take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from my native land, who promised me on oath, saying, I will assign this land to your offspring. He will send his angel before you, and you will get a wife for my son from there. And if the woman does not consent to follow you, you shall then be clear of this oath to me, but do not take my son back there. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham and swore to him as bidden.
Thank you. June, would you like to read a little beginning at verse 10?
Thank you, Rabbi. And the servant took 10 camels of the camels of his master and departed, having all goodly things of his master's in his hand. And he arose and went to Aram Naharim unto the city of Nahor. And he made the camels to kneel down without the city by the well of water at the time of evening, the time that women go out to draw water. And he said, O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, send me, I pray thee, good speed this day, and show kindness unto my master Abraham. Behold, I stand by the fountain of water, and the daughters of the men of the city come out to draw water. So let it come to pass that the damsel to whom I shall say, let down thy pitcher, I pray thee, that I may drink, and she shall say, drink, and I will give thy camels drink also. Let the same be she that thou hast appointed for thy servant, even for Isaac. And thereby shall I know that thou hast shown kindness unto my master.
Thank you so much. Dave Leb, would you like to read starting at verse 15?
Okay. He had scarcely finished speaking when Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with her jar on her shoulder. The maiden was very beautiful, a virgin whom no man had known. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up. The servant ran toward her and said, Please let me sip a little water from your jar. Drink, my lord, she said, and she quickly lowered her jar upon her hand and let him drink. When she had let him drink his fill, she said, I will also draw for your camels until they finish drinking. Quickly emptying her jar into the trough, she ran back to the well to draw, and she drew for all his camels.
Thank you, Dave. Mark Thompson, would you like to read starting at verse 21?
Thank you, Rabbi. The man, meanwhile, stood gazing at her, silently wondering whether Adonai had made his errand successful or not. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold nose ring weighing a half shekel and 2 gold bands for her arms, 10 shekels in weight. Pray tell me, he said, whose daughter are you? Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night? She replied, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Meliah, whom she bore to Nahor. And she went on, there is plenty of straw and feed at home, and also room to spend the night. The man bowed low in homage to Adonai and said, Blessed be Adonai, the God of my master Abraham, who has not withheld his steadfast faithfulness from my master. For I have been guided on my errand by Adonai to the house of my master's kinsman.
Thank you, Mark. Let me invite Jim. Would you like to read starting at verse 28?
Thank you, Rabbi. The maiden ran and told all this to her mother's household. Now Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban. Laban ran out to the man at the spring. when he saw the nose ring and the bands on his sister's arms, and when he heard his sister Rebekah say, "Thus the man spoke to me," he went up to the man who was still standing beside the camels at the spring. "Come in, O blessed of Adonai," he said. "Why do you remain outside when I have made ready the house and a place for the camels?" So the man entered the house, and the camels were unloaded. The camels were given straw and feed, and water was brought to bathe his feet and the feet of the men with him. But when food was set before him, he said, "I will not eat until I have told my tale." He said, "Speak then."
Thank you, Jim. Let me invite Robin to read starting at verse 34.
Thank you, Rabbi. I am the slave of Abraham, said he, and Adonai has blessed my master exceedingly and made him rich, giving him sheep and cattle, silver and gold, male and female slaves, camels and donkeys. Sarah, my son, my master's wife, bore him a son in her old age, and my master has given him everything he owns. My master adjured me, saying, "You must not choose a wife for my son from among the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I now live. Go rather to my father's people, to my relations, and take a wife for my son." I said to my master, "What if the woman will not follow me?" He answered, "Adonai, before whom I have walked, will send an angel with you who will clear the way for you. You will take a wife for my son from my clan, from my father's family. You will be free from your obligation only if you go to my relations and they refuse you. In that case, you will be free from your obligation."
Thank you so much, Robin. Paul, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 42?
Yes, Rabbi. I came today to the spring and said, "Hashem, God of my master Abraham, if you would graciously make successful the way on which I go. Behold, I am standing by the spring of water. Let it be that the young woman who comes out to draw, and to whom I shall say, 'Please give me some water to drink from your jug,' and who will answer, 'You may also drink, and I will draw water for your camels too.' She shall be the woman whom Hashem has designated for my master's son." I had not yet finished meditating when suddenly Rebekah came out with a jug on her shoulder and descended to the spring and drew water. Then I said to her, "Please give me a drink." She hurried and lowered her jug from upon herself and said, "Drink, and I will even water your camels." So I drank, and she watered the camels also. Then I questioned her and said, "Whose daughter are you?" And she said, "The daughter of Bethuel, son of Nahor, whom Milcah bore to him." And I placed the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her hands. Then I bowed and prostrated myself to Hashem and blessed Hashem, God of my master Abraham, who led me on a true path to take the daughter of my master's brother for his son. And now, if you intend to do kindness and truth with my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, and I will turn to the right or to the left.
Thank you, Paul. And Justin, would you like to read beginning at verse 50?
Thank you, Rabbi. And Laban and Bethuel answered and said, "The matter has emanated from the Lord. We cannot speak to you either bad or good. Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be a wife to your master's son, as the Lord has spoken." And now it came to pass when Abraham's servant heard their words that he prostrated himself on the ground to the Lord. And the servant took out silver articles and golden articles and garments, and he gave them to Rebekah. And he gave delicacies to her brother and to her mother. And they ate and drank, he and the men who were with him. And they lodged, and they arose in the morning, and he said, "Send me away to my master." And her brother and her mother said, "Let the maiden stay with us a year or 10 months, afterwards she will go. But he said to them, do not delay me, since the Lord has made my way prosper. Send me away, and I will go to my master. And they said, let us call the maiden and ask her. And they summoned Rebekah, and they said to her, will you go with this man? And she said, I will go. So they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men, Abraham's. And they blessed Rebekah, and they said to her, our sister, may you become thousands of myriads, and may your seed inherit the cities of their enemies. And Rebekah and her maidens arose and rode on the camels, and they followed the man. And the servant took Rebekah and left.
Thank you, Justin. Jay Isaac, would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 62?
Thank you, Rabbi. Isaac had just come back from the vicinity of Beer Lahai Roi, for he was settled in the region of the Negev. And Isaac went out walking in the field toward evening, and looking up, he saw camels approaching. Raising her eyes, Rebekah saw Isaac. She alighted from the camel and said to the servant, who is that man walking in the field toward us? And the servant said, that is my master. So she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac all the things he had done. Isaac then brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he took Rebekah as his wife. Isaac loved her and thus found comfort after his mother's death.
Thank you, Jay.
Continue.
Yeah, let me invite Hannah. Do you want to do some reading?
Sure, what verse are we on?
We are at the beginning of chapter 25.
Abraham went on and took a wife named Keturah. She bore to him Zimran, Yokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Yokshan begot Sheva, Dedan, and Dedan's sons were Ashurim, Letushim, and Leumim. Midian's sons were Ether, Hanoch, Avidah, Eldah, and all these were Keturah's sons. Abraham gave all that he owned to Isaac, but to the sons of Abraham's concubines, he gave gifts while he was still alive. He sent them away from Isaac eastward toward the land of Kedem. These are the days of the years of Abraham's life. He lived 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in good old age, full of age, and was gathered to his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, facing Mamre, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar, the Hittite, the field that Abraham bought from the Hittites. There, Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried. After the death of Abraham, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac lived near Be'er Lahai Roi.
Thank you. Richard, would you like to read starting at verse 12?
Yes, this is the line of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's slave, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Masa, Hadad, Tamar, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedman. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their villages and by their encampments, 12 chieftains of as many tribes. These were the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. Then he breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his kin. They ranged from Havilah by Shur, which is close to Egypt, all the way to Ashur. They made raids against all their kinsmen.
Thank you very much, everyone. That is our Torah portion for the week. I'd like to share with you a little bit of focus study, and then we'll open it up for our conversation. If you have the study sheet, I invite you to take a look at the painting that's at the very top of the page. This is a painting called Twilight, and it is by Rahila Roxari. Let me tell you a little bit about the artist and what she says about her work. So Rahila Roxari was born into an artistic family in Iran, and she eventually left Iran in the year 2007. She traveled to India and then to Southeast Asia, studying art along the way. And some of the things that she says about her work is that she gradually moved from painting what she saw in the outside world and began to focus more on what she saw on the inside world, that is within herself. And here's a little bit of what she says about her work. She says, I continually observe how my technique and my painting evolve from one to another, and this gives me joy and a sense of adventure. I see myself in the middle of a story told in a novel. I know how I started and how I have reached here, and do not know where paintings will take me next. So it's fascinating. I picked out this painting for a reason which I'll share with you in a moment, but after I picked out this painting, I studied a little bit more about her and discovered that this particular painting that we have here, Twilight, was part of an exhibition of several artists in 2014 that they were encouraged to produce a work around the theme of new beginnings. So in turn, that is what the theme of our study session tonight is, which is the end as also a beginning. Let me share with you another quote from our artist, Rahila Roxari. She writes, the whole painting process for me represents a full life cycle. It is born with the first brush stroke and dies with the last. At the end, after I put on my signature, I whisper to myself that in the next painting, I will start in a different way. What she has painted in this oil of twilight. So twilight is that liminal moment, that time in between day and evening, between light and darkness. And so the feeling that is conjured up is that of a threshold in time, one which represents both an end and a beginning. And in our own tradition, in the Jewish tradition, it's fascinating to think about twilight leads into nighttime, and nighttime when the sun goes down is when in Judaism we celebrate the beginning of a new day. So these themes of endings and beginnings, I think, is what we're going to be looking at in the context of our Torah portion, and this beautiful painting of a Sufi dancer who in a sense seems to be gripping, and if you will, two moments in time and perhaps holding on to both of them, the daytime, the evening time, and standing there in between them in this threshold moment, this liminal moment of twilight. And it's an interesting conversation to have about whether the Sufi is actually objectively and physically in that moment of twilight, or whether through the practice of the Sufi, the ecstatic dancing has in fact generated a feeling of being between times, between worlds, between moments, in this threshold liminal experience of it's neither this nor that, it is both, if you will. So this is what we're going to look at, the end as also a beginning. So our Torah portion begins curiously by saying, the lifetime of Sarah was 127 years. And yet the very next portion in that verse says, and Sarah died. So it begins by talking about her life, and within the same verse says, she died. So this provokes a lot of commentary and exploration into, well, why does it say in one sentence, life and death. And then a lot of commentators begin to wonder, well, what provoked this death? What's the context of this death? So we have Rashi, our wonderful medieval commentator, coming in with his interpretation, and then we're going to look at some midrash, which follows. So in number 2, this is what Rashi says. Sarah's death is juxtaposed with the binding of Isaac, because through hearing the news of the binding, that her son had been ready for slaughter and had been nearly slaughtered, her soul flew from her and she died. So Rashi is picking up on the beginning of our Torah portion, where it says that Abraham was coming from Beersheba, and Beersheba is the land that Abraham had traveled to immediately after the binding of Isaac. So by drawing that connection, Rashi is saying that she immediately got this news that her son had almost been slaughtered by her husband, and that caused her such grief, such terror, that she died from hearing this news. The Midrash picks up on this a little bit. Isaac returned to his mother, and she said to him, "Where have you been, my son?" He answered, "My father took me and led me up hill and down dale." She said, "Woe upon the son of the drunken woman! Were it not for the angel, you would be already slaughtered." "Yes," he said. At that, she screamed 6 times, corresponding to the tekiah notes. She had not finished doing this when she died. In just a little bit, we're going to focus on the significance of the reference to the tekiah notes of the shofar. But here, once again, the Midrash is picking up on this notion that she has learned he's alive. So shouldn't that be some cause for celebration? You're safe and sound. Whatever traumatic experience you've encountered, you survived it. But rather, when she hears the news about how Abraham took him up to Mount Moriah and bound him and was ready to set a fire and had a knife in his hand, the mere possibility that that could have happened so terrifies her that her soul leaves her and she dies. If you turn over your study sheet, we're going to look at some further commentary that Rabbi Lowy, the great rabbi from Prague, who lived from about 1520 to 1609. Many of you are familiar with him for his association with the story of the golem. So Rabbi Lowy is kind of picking up on these themes and says, this is the human reaction of panic on realizing that only a small thing separated one from such a fate. So I think Rabbi Lowy is kind of picking up on this midrash, this commentary from Rashi, and is attending to the fact that this screaming that Sarah engages in, he associates with a screaming that proclaims the end of all things. Even though the evidence is before her that things didn't end, that Isaac is right there, she's so terrified by the possibility of Isaac's sacrifice that she can't stand it, and she screams and dies. We're going to look at a little bit of modern commentary to explore this notion of what does it mean to live primarily in a state of anxiety, to live primarily constantly with an awareness of the possibility of loss, and that perhaps that's what life is all about, always on the edge of loss. What does that do to one's emotional state of being? What does that do to one's capacity to live in the world? So this is a little bit of commentary from the French historian Paul Ricoeur from his book, History and Truth. And Paul Ricoeur lived from about 1913 to 2005. And in his book, he writes, negation is an expression of finitude. Want is expressed negatively, as in, I don't have. And the past is expressed as something that is no longer. And the future is described as something that is not yet. And death is nothingness. This way of thinking causes the soul to pass to a lesser perfection. To transcend this requires a negation of negation. The soul of refusal, of contestation, is fundamentally affirmation. I think what Paul Ricoeur here is saying that when all we are aware of, or when primarily what we're aware of, is the finiteness of everything, that everything has limit, that then our soul becomes sullied by that, our spirit becomes depressed by that, we become cynical and mourning, if you will. And for him, the sense to resist this decline into entropy, the collapse of all of existence, to resist that, he considers that to be an ethical act. And I want to suggest that this is a lesson that Torah is also teaching us. And it is not teaching us as it does in this week's Torah portion. It doesn't teach us through a language of philosophy or ideology or of doctrine or theology. It's teaching us this lesson about the importance of resisting just being swallowed up by the notion that all things end. It teaches us through the very literary structure of this week's Torah portion, because this week's Torah portion begins with a reference to death, Sarah's death, but it ends very differently. The Torah portion ends with a narrative about Abraham getting married once again, of Abraham having more children, of Isaac getting married, of Ishmael being reborn, of having more children, and of Isaac and Ishmael being reunited and coming together to bury their father Abraham after he dies. If we look at back at the reference in our Midrash where it talks about the Tekiah notes, one of the fascinating things about the Tekiah notes that is blown on the shofar during the High Holy Days is that the Tekiah is the first shofar sound during the High Holy Days, and it's also the last sound during High Holy Days. So in a sense, it is sounded at the very beginning of High Holy Days to awaken us from a spiritual slumber. And then it's sounded at the very end of High Holy Days, on the end of Yom Kippur, marking the conclusion of this moment. But it marks that conclusion with a message that something else is coming next. So in that sense, the Tekiah note is the bookends of all life. It marks the beginning of something and the conclusion of something, but that conclusion is really marking the beginning of something new that is happening. So here we have, I'd like to share with you at the end here, a beautiful poem by the great Sufi poet Rumi, which seems particularly appropriate since we began by looking at a Persian's painting of a Sufi dancer in the midst of his moment of ecstasy, where he is straddling between the end and the beginning of times of day. So here's a poem by Rumi. Look at love, how it tangles with the one fallen in love. Look at spirit, how it fuses with earth, giving it new life. Why are you so busy with this or that, or good or bad? Pay attention to how things blend. Why talk about all the known and the unknown? See how the unknown merges into the known. Why think separately of this life and the next when one is born from the last? You too must mingle, my friends, since the earth and the sky are mingled just for you and me. My beloved grows right out of my heart. How much more union can there be? This is a very powerful Torah portion, and it is amplified by this beautiful painting. It's amplified by this beautiful poem by Rumi, and it teaches us, not frontally, not directly, but it teaches us through the flow of the narrative that what seems to be the end of something has within it the beginning of new life. So with that, I'd love to open it up and hear your thoughts and your comments and reflections on this week's Torah portion. If you'd like to raise your hand, I'd so love to call on you. Thank you. Mark?
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm thinking about the experience I had in Peru when I was hiking on the Inca Trail, and my guide, Peruvian, was talking about the past. And yet when he talked about the past, symbolically, I'm sorry, he was talking about the future. When he talked about the future symbolically, he motioned backwards. And I found this was fascinating because according to the Incan culture, they kept their dead with them and transported their dead as mummies wherever they went, and carved niches in caves and rocks so that they would constantly be with them. So there was never a separation between that which happened and that which was of the future. And it's very interesting because one of the cultures of the Inca tradition, the Amari, I think they're called, their language actually reflects a discussion about the future as if it's already happened, so that they're able to keep somehow this vision of time isn't a limiting thing at all. And it's a negation, I think, an expression of finitude. It's a negation of that. And I think we have a lot to learn sometimes from different cultures.
Thank you, Marla. What you got me to think about was just kind of a very slight reference in our portion here about what happens after death. And Torah itself, indeed, and pretty much the whole Jewish Bible doesn't really explicitly get into any notions about what happens in life after death. But the reference here in this week's Torah portion is described as one is gathered to one's ancestors.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what you think about that. What's that feeling? What's that you get when you have this notion about being gathered to one's ancestors?
Yes, it's a sense of inclusion, isn't it?
Yeah, is there some kind of reconstitution, if you will?
Yeah.
It's like a new kind of ingathering, if you will, is at least the feeling that I get when I see that.
That's nice. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for telling us that story. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, others. Richard?
Yes, I've always enjoyed that, thought about that, gathered to my kin. And it just has always seemed to me, well, shouldn't it be gathered by my kin? And the other thing I noted here tonight was that when I saw this painting, originally I thought the Sufi dancer with the globe. And I see that it's not a globe, it's an egg.
That's very nice. Okay, that's very nice. Thank you. All right, others?
Yeah, I
Okay, okay, see?
As soon as I heard it was about Persia, I remembered that Sherry and I had the privilege visiting the Iranian embassy in Washington, D.C., while the Shah of Iran was still in power. Now it's closed and nobody can go in. And it was so beautiful inside with all of this mosaic, the little mirrors all over the place, and the colors and the ceramics. It was terrific.
Sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
You're very fortunate to have been able to see it.
Yeah, and the other thing, I have two other things I remember. One is the Iranian physicist invented the helium neon laser.
Helium neon laser,
Yeah,
okay?
which is used all over the place. It's used even now for artistic purposes. But he was working at Bell Telephone Labs in the United States at that time.
I don't know much about it. This sounds like it's something that's both scientific and artistic at the same
Yes,
time.
Yes, exactly.
Wow, fascinating. Thank you. Okay. Others? Yes, Sherry?
You know, I looked at, this is the
A
painting.
little louder.
Oh, the painting, and I looked at it at my phone, on my iPhone, and looked at it closely. And from my point of view, looking close in, it looks as though the hands are an extension of like paintbrushes, as though, you know, he's like almost like a child with finger paints, just, you know, gathering that. And that was a thought I had, and the concept of just circular, the beginning is the end, the end is the beginning. And the discussion we had earlier at the beginning about being how it's so easy to become cynical if you allow yourself to just to take every loss and just see that as the end and compile one thing after the other. It's very easy to do that. It takes an effort really to and a sense of trust, maybe, to see ends as beginnings and so on.
So first of all, I love what you observed in the painting. And as I look at it now, it does look as if his hands are somehow, they're not separate from the work of the creation, that his body is fused into this this bit of creation with the colors and everything. So that's lovely. And you also reminded me, as through what you were saying, that our Torah portion is called Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah. And so when we read this, we might think, wait a minute, it's not about the life of Sarah, it's about the death of Sarah, right? But that's a limitation on our part to think it's just about the death, because or that her life can't extend beyond her biological limitations, because once her biology comes to an end, there's all this other activity that's going on that was also she helped engender, that she was a part of. And so our Torah portion may be telling us, you know, don't be so limited in what we think of as the course of one's life, that there's more to it than what we might imagine. So let me invite Paul, and then I'll get to Dave.
Yeah, well, this story about Abraham and Isaac always bothered me, but somehow or other, when somebody was reading the part that Abraham got married again and he had some sons, so I looked at the part that Rashi said, and since we're talking about the death of Sarah, well, it's if I put myself in Sarah's position, and my husband went out to knock off my son, and then the idea that out of this later on he gets married again and has another son, you know, you wonder about what about that that other son. He's got something to think about with this father. And so what killed her? Well, it's pretty bad news if I was a woman and I had a husband like that. So I argue a little bit with Rashi. It's the only time in my life I dare do something like that. But it bothered me that he skipped the woman here. This is a carryover from last week yet. The women are really, you know, maybe she had some insight. Maybe she loved her son and she started thinking about this guy I picked out. I got troubles here.
Well, that's definitely, one line of thinking. And what you also remind us is to look back in the narrative here about Abraham taking another wife. And it says whose name was Keturah. And there's all this midrash that begins to explore who exactly was this woman Keturah. And what they look at is immediately above that. It says, well, Isaac had just come back from Bir Lahai Roy. And the commentators and the Midrash, they go, I remember that place, Bir Lahai Roy. That's where Hagar was. And so they make up this lovely story about how after Sarah dies, Isaac, out of love for his father, goes back to Bir Lahai Roy, finds Hagar, and brings Hagar back to Abraham, and that's who Abraham marries, according to the Midrash. It's this fantastic sense of this reconstitution, a healing, if you will, of this rupture that had happened within the family. Richard?
Two little things here about that paragraph. It talks about him marrying them. And it also says he gave everything to Isaac and gave these other boys gifts before he died. The children of his concubines, which are different than wives.
Yeah.
And also another thing that puzzled me was this business of Rebecca does not appear, as I read this, to be the daughter of Laban, but the granddaughter of Nahor. She's the cousin once removed of Isaac. But it says in the text, it calls her the daughter of Laban.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an inconsistency that's been unearthed by the rabbis?
No. No, she's portrayed as, well, Rebecca had a brother whose name was Laban. Okay. That's in verse 29.
Yes, but
Yeah.
it's not Abraham's brother.
No, that Laban is his nephew, is Abraham's.
Abram led me the right way to get the daughter of my master's brother for his son. Verse 48.
Okay.
I mean, line, yeah.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is it usual today in Israel to name people after all of these names? Because I know somebody by the name of Mordecai Kedar.
Yes, so.
That's Rachel's friend, isn't it?
Yeah, he's a professor at Bar Ilan University.
Okay, well, you send him this verse and say,
Uh-huh.
I read about you this week in the Torah portion.
But the question is it common for Israelis when they have a son to pull out all of these names?
Well, for some, I think it's for some, yeah. Okay. All right. And other thoughts, reflections on the Torah portion? Mark?
Yes. Could we go back to chapter 24, verse 16?
Okay.
The maiden was very beautiful, a virgin whom no man had known. So I'm looking at the Hebrew, and in the JPS Tanakh that I have, there's small lettering that says v'na'ar, and then it says v'na'ara. So I'm wondering why there are two words that mean slightly different, of course, the gender. But then I'm also thinking, well, this is what confuses a lot of people about the word virgin, because na'ara, it doesn't mean virgin, but then it's stating later on that she's a virgin who knew no man. So that's already redundant. So I'm a little bit confused about hana'ara, and whether this is just cause for more confusion.
There's a footnote.
Go ahead.
There's a footnote in the
Okay.
women's commentary on that. It says the word Betula is
Yeah.
often translated as virgin.
Yeah.
But it has a broader meaning than a biological one. In the ancient world, women often married shortly after puberty. Therefore, one can assume that Rebecca is very young. Isaac, her future husband, is 40 years old. And then it says, whom no man had yet known. To know in the Bible often refers to sexual relationships. This phrase indicates that Rebecca is a virgin. So it's like, it might be like you're a young person, or you
Yeah.
might be a physical virgin, or you might just be a young teen.
Yeah, the
Something like
way
that.
the word that's used to first describe her has to do with her age range rather than
Okay.
any sexual experience. And that's why later it adds that other dimension about, yes, this is a young
Okay.
woman who hasn't had sexual relations with a man.
That's clear to me.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Other thoughts and reflections about the portion?
Yes.
Okay.
This beautiful picture that you have, that symphony there. Well, what a symphony. What a conductor. That's like, I mean, that's like, you want to create something joyous and beautiful. Just put your arms out like that. And the nuance of each finger and all the color and the life that comes from it just makes, it's like you can almost hear the music.
That's lovely. It's lovely to see the Sufi there as conducting music that is then producing shapes and colors.
Well, creating music, you know,
Creating
as
music.
you conduct it, you
Well,
create.
if his hands are not hands, but are part of what we're looking at, he's not being objectively looking at anything. He is like, as Jackson Pollock, he has become part of the transition from day to night.
Right. Exactly.
He is in ecstasis.
What's this word? Tell us this word again.
Ecstasis.
What does that mean?
Well, we talk about an ecstatic experience, which are outside of the realm of time. You're not stabilized in a moment where there's you and there's objects. You are at one with everything in that egg.
Ecstasis.
Wow. So this is really fascinating. So this is really amplifying this theme about when one lives primarily with the notion that everything has an end, everything is merely finite, the level of cynicism and depression that can produce, and then that's countered by this notion of ecstasis, is that the right word? Where you're fused, if you will, with these energies, these powers of creation, which you are a part of, and you are a generator of these beautiful colors and words and movement, and it's all happening in this in-between state of being.
Let me give you this. Rabbi, will you read us this poem?
Which
Just
one?
sight read that for us.
This one,
right
Isaac?
There.
Okay.
Yeah, right there.
Rebecca has married the dusks that are the essence of in-betweens, a gray so sensitive it easily forgives. On a noble camel she rode toward her dusks, and seeing them across from her, so restrained, serious as jasmine severed from its fragrance, she fell off the camel like a joyous vat of wine whose hoops have been loosened.
Isn't that fine?
The lovely poem. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. Wow. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming together and celebrating, if you will, this beautiful body of literature, which doesn't really preach to us, it tells us stories. And it reminds me of the great Hasidic rabbi, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who talked about the redemptive capacity of story. That when we're telling stories, we are telling something that is not only familiar to us, we're telling something that we live. We live out these stories, and thereby we have this access to this power to transcend the finiteness of any moment. Because we get taken along this path of narrative. And this is a beautiful example, this narrative of Chayei Sarah, which teaches us that what looks like the end of something is just full of new beginnings. I want to thank each and every one of you for helping all of us and each one of us appreciate and understand and generate new beginnings as the way we do every day, and especially when we come together in our Torah study. Thank you so much, everyone. Be well. God bless you all. See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks.